This is the first set of notes on the plant unit. The first topic that we're going to cover today is about plant tissues and about structures and just transport in plants. So if you'll start off in your notes and draw and label a plant, just a simple plant will do. The big thing for you to understand is the path of water transport, because a lot of what happens in plants and a lot of what plants are about is about the transport of water and nutrients in the plant. So if you'll show that the water goes from the roots through the stem to the leaves, that's the ultimate um, transport that happens in the plant. And we're going to talk about how that happens and what kind of tissues it happens in and so forth. Of course, you know why it's necessary for that. That is that water is a necessary element or substance for photosynthesis, and that photosynthesis can't occur without water. Now, in plants, there are four main kinds of tissues. So be sure to write down these. The red terms are the vocabulary terms you need to know. The purple words, like it was when Ms. Billingsley was doing the notes, the purple words are the ones that you need to be sure to write down. And the black things are just things we're going to talk about that you don't really have to know the details. So the four kinds of tissues are dermal tissue, vascular tissue, ground tissue, and meristematic tissue. The dermal tissue is kind of like skin. It prevents water loss. An example would be like the epidermis. And in plants, you have epidermis and endodermis and a couple of other dermal kinds of tissues in various places. Vascular tissue is composed of xylem and phloem. Xylem is the transport mechanism that carries water from the roots up through the stem to the leaves, and phloem carries the food from the leaves to the rest of the plant. So xylem is water, phloem is food. If you can remember the F sounds go together, that's an easy way to remember that phloem is food. The ground tissue is all other kinds of cells between the dermal and vascular tissue. A lot of different kinds of tissue are included here. A lot of this tissue is basically undifferentiated tissue. It's just cells that take up space. There are other functions that occur there. There are parenchyma tissues that include the cells that undergo photosynthesis and cells that store foods in different places, like, for instance, the starch that's stored in a potato or something like that. There are collenchyma and sclerenchyma cells that have thick walls that are there for support. I'm not going to expect you to know parenchyma and collenchyma and sclerenchyma. I just want you to know that there's ground tissue that's undifferentiated tissue, different from the others. And then the final kind of tissue is meristematic tissue. This is where growth occurs. Growth occurs only in certain kinds of places, and that's where the meristematic tissue is located. Now, there are two main kinds of roots, and we'll talk a little bit more about what this means later on, but there are fibrous roots and there are taproots. Fibrous roots are more often found in monocots, which is one of the big groups of flowering plants. You see here that they're there's no main root, there's just a whole bunch of little tiny roots there. And then we have a taproot system that has one or more main roots with smaller roots attached to that. So we have several different, here's a sunflower taproot that has several equal branches like this. We have a blazing star, which is a type of weed, basically, that has a primary taproot. And then we've got a taproot like a carrot that's a swollen taproot that's used for storage of food. And these are most often found in dicots, the other major group of flowering plants, which we will talk about later this week. Now, inside the roots, although even though the whole root structure is different from monocots and dicots, also the molecular structure or the cellular structure of the roots is different between monocots and dicots, but they have the same kinds of things. They're just arranged a little bit differently. So we have epidermal tissue that's found surrounding the outside of both kinds of roots, and we have a vascular cylinder basically in the middle of the root, and it's a little bit different in dicots and monocots. In dicots, the xylem makes a big X there, and then the phloem cells are found in between the arms there of the X. And in the monocot root, we have xylem tissue that's arranged in a circular pattern embedded within the phloem tissue, and then in the center, there's pith, which is just kind of like fibrous kind of structure. The vascular cylinder in both things is covered is surrounded by a layer of endodermis and a pericycle, which is another group of cells there that kind of separates those from the ground tissue and the rest of the root. The cortex here is just ground tissue, the basic ground tissue. Notice the pith is only found in the monocots. In stems, you have several different kinds of stems. This is a woody stem, okay? And please just think of the terms that are found here and what they mean to. A node is where you have a branch, basically, okay? And it's where the little buds are located. And so you have a branch here that has several different nodes on it, and that new growth can occur at those places. We have axillary buds; those are the ones on the sides. We have terminal bud, which is at the top of the plant. The internode is the space in between the nodes, and that just is used for terminology more for taxonomy than anything else as far as we're concerned. This just shows the growth of a couple of years, so you can kind of see where the scars are on the woody plant as it's growing to see what's occurred where. Now, inside the stem is also, you have the different kinds of cells that are arranged there. Okay, you have the ground tissue here, and you have the epidermis around the outside. And between dicot and monocot stems, the arrangement of the vascular tissue is different. In a dicot stem, you have the vascular bundles, as they are, arranged in a circle, around the outside, around the center. In monocot stems, you have a number of vascular bundles that are just scattered throughout the stem like this. So this is a very different arrangement. When you look at the stems, you can see this. These are herbaceous stems. These are green flexible stems as opposed to woody stems. And when you compare woody and herbaceous stems, you see they have some of the same kinds of things, but in the woody stems, you've also got the secondary growth that produces the cork layer and the bark that's involved there. So there's primary xylem and secondary xylem, and it forms the growth rings in woody stems. You don't see that in the herbaceous stems as much. We're not going to worry too much about primary and secondary phloem and primary and secondary xylem and the cambium and things like that. We're just going to talk about the growth of the plants in general. Now, in leaves, you have several different kinds of structures. The main structure of a leaf, the main part of the leaf is called the blade, okay? And in the leaf, you see the veins and the ribs that are there. The leaf stalk here is called the petiole, and it's attached here to the stem at a bud, an axillary bud, usually. If we take a little piece of the leaf and cut into it and look at it microscopically, it looks like this. You've got different layers of cells that look different too. The leaves have a waxy cuticle on them, which is a protective layer. The cuticle is found on the upper and lower surface. This is why a lot of leaves look kind of shiny and feel kind of waxy, because they actually do have a waxy coat. There's upper epidermis and lower epidermis. They're just plain epidermal cells. And then we've got the parenchyma, also called the mesophyll, the palisade parenchyma or mesophyll, where the cells are shaped like columns. And this is the primary place where photosynthesis occurs. And then we have the spongy parenchyma or mesophyll that has cells where photosynthesis also occurs, but it's spongy because there are air spaces in between. On the lower surface of the leaf, and sometimes on the upper surface, you'll find the openings there called stoma or stomata, and they're surrounded by specialized cells called guard cells that open and close to allow water vapor and bring in oxygen and let out carbon dioxide, and also bring in carbon dioxide as the plant needed by the plant. In the vein, you have vascular tissue. The xylem is found on the top, and the phloem is found on the bottom. And we'll do an activity about leaf structure in another day or so. Now, transport in plants is involved with moving the water from the soil to the root and the food from the leaves to the rest of the plant. So in order to get water from the soil all the way up to the top of the plant, since there's no pumping mechanism, it depends on those characteristics of water that we talked about way back at the beginning of school, cohesion and adhesion. Those two forces help pull water up the xylem. There's also a process called transpiration, which is basically evaporation at the leaf level that's going to pull some of the water out, as well as photosynthesis in the leaves, pulling water out. And so that's going to create a pressure that's going to bring those water molecules as they move up the xylem tissues. So we have it's cohesion and adhesion, transpiration. All of those things are involved in moving the water from the root to the top of the plant. And some plants, like big, huge, tall trees, you can imagine this would take a lot of work, a lot of pumping to happen. But because of depending on these natural processes, is actually not as difficult as it might be otherwise. The vascular system of flowering plants includes the xylem and phloem, and we're going to look more at those than we do at some of the others, because those are the ones we're most familiar with. The vascular system transports material through the plant, and the xylem is composed of several different kinds of cells. The cells are hollow, and they carry water and minerals up from the roots to the upper part of the plant. Two main kinds of cells found in the xylem are the tracheids and vessel elements. The tracheids are spindle-shaped cells with pits in their walls that allow water to flow not only up and down, but also side to side from one cell to the next. And then a vessel element is a group of mature tracheids, and these help make the water flow more easily. They kind of act like tubes. They have thickened secondary walls, and they're non-living. The tracheids are living cells, and the vessel elements are no longer living, but still function to move things from place to place. Here we see some tracheids here with the pits between the cells connecting them so that the water can travel from one cell to the next, and the vessel elements that are alongside. Here you see the vessel elements and the tracheids surrounding it, so that the water can flow really easily through that tissue. They're pretty small. Notice that this is microscopic, so the water molecules are not going to be, they're going to be more stacked on top of each other rather than a whole bunch together. The phloem carries dissolved sugars and hormones from the production region, usually in the leaves, to the other parts of the plant. And the main structures that are involved in the phloem are the sieve tube members and companion cells. The sieve tube members are living cells that are tubular cells that have a sieve plate at the end. So sieve is kind of like a sifter or a strainer. And the companion cells are non-conducting cells that help provide metabolic support for the sieve tubes. Even though the sieve tubes are living, they have a lot of empty space in them for the fluids to pass through. So they need the companion cells to help provide the metabolic support for those cells. And they're connected by intracellular connections. Here we see the sieve tube cells. See how they have the sieve plate here connecting the cells together. And then the companion cells that are connected also by these lateral openings that allow them to take care of metabolic needs for the sieve tube cells. Phloem transport travels from source to sink. Okay, the source is where the sugar is made in the leaf, and it moves through the phloem to the sink where there's less sugar. Again, still depending on diffusion to take care of these things, moving from high concentration to lower concentration. And so the sink is going to be the other parts of the plant where the food is needed or where it's stored. For instance, here in the background you see the outline of the sugar beet. Okay, and the sugar beet, the sugar is stored in the root here. It's produced in the leaves, and it travels through the phloem from the high concentration in the leaves to the lower concentration in the sink or in the root. Okay, water is traveling from high concentration in the root to lower concentration in the leaves, and the sugars are traveling in opposite directions. That is the end of this section of notes, and we'll continue on next talking about different groups of plants.